Center for Rural Affairs was established to build more vibrant rural communities. We are rural people working for and on behalf of rural people. You see here a map of where our offices are located. Through our many buckets of work, we connect and serve communities in Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Minnesota. I mentioned that in our Iowa office, our staff is located in Nevada. That's central Iowa, just east of Ames. Like I said before, our state policy portfolio, which is the bucket of work that I lead here at the center, has a few topics related to rural resiliency overall. In our renewable energy work, we work to help rural communities as they explore the adoption of wind, solar, and transmission line projects in regard to siting and community engagement. We also use these experiences to help inform balanced public policies at the state and local level. In our climate work, we focus on engaging with rural Iowans on this topic, sharing their stories, and identifying ways that they can get involved with climate. Our water quality work is focused on ensuring that rural communities have an active and involved seat at the table when it comes to setting goals and making decisions about improving water quality and reducing flooding impacts. Often, this takes the form of watershed management authorities. And lastly, in the past year, we've increased our attention on the important topic of supporting local meat processors. As you may probably know, the pandemic exposed and exaggerated the need for support to local meat processors, both in Iowa and in other states we work in, including Nebraska and South Dakota. Many of us were in a situation where we couldn't get our livestock into a meat processor due to the backlog that was even further exaggerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is another priority that we're focused on throughout this legislative session. This turns out to be the perfect segue to transition into a brief introduction from our guest today. Representative Chad Ingels represents House District 64 in Eastern Iowa. He is a farmer and a previous water quality specialist with Iowa State Extension and Outreach. We're happy that you've taken the time to join us today, Representative Ingels, and I just wanted to give you the floor here to make some brief opening comments before we kind of dive into our discussion today. So thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Cody. I'm honored to be a part of it. A little of my background, Cody mentioned, I farm in Fayette County, corn, soybeans, some oats and hay and hogs. And last year or so, we've got starting to get into a few cattle too. As he mentioned, I was also a water projects coordinator for Iowa State Extension for several years. And so I have a little background in water quality, also a background in education, was on our local small school board for over 20 years. So I have an interest in that. Cody mentioned that he's located in Nevada. We got out a little early at the Capitol today and are doing a tour of the meat lab at Iowa State University. Since we've been doing a little work on meat processing across the state, we're seeing what they have to offer here at Iowa State. So just got through with that and jumped on the call. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation here.
Well, thank you again for joining us. I've been to the meat lab there and it's a great facility and I think it offers a lot for our state. We'll just go ahead and hop into the prepared questions section just to give us a springboard for the rest of the discussion today. So I'm going to start with the first question here related to the topic we were just discussing. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed and worsened many issues facing small-scale meat processors across the state. This includes limited capacity and access to funds to expand operations. We know that you've worked this session to introduce House File, now it's 857, which would create a grant program to assist these processors among several other items. Could you explain your proposal and describe why you think it's needed during this time?
Right. So our proposal is it's through the Economic Growth Committee. So we're looking at that angle that we're trying to build capacity with meat processing across the state by supporting local lockers. And generally, we're looking at smaller type state inspected lockers to help them build their capacity, not only to move product through there, but to hopefully at some point increase the opportunity for small farmers to get into private labeling their product so that they can sell by the piece. I know a lot want to do that. We're also looking at those incentives would help lockers add equipment, improve their facilities, maybe buy new facilities, potentially rent for short-term capacity increasing so that they can build capacity quickly, and then also to support some job training as well. And part of the bill, this kind of the second part of the bill, puts together a task force that is going to try to identify the best way to do job training to support employees at meat lockers and kind of build that next generation of people that want to get into small meat processing across the state. So it's kind of multifaceted. It's working through the system. It's on the debate schedule. Could be debated now as early as Monday, which is kind of exciting. It's the first bill I filed as a new legislator, so I'm have been following it pretty closely. And now during the budget process, we're working through identifying funding for that, and we're optimistic that we can get between $500,000 to $1 million allocated for this fund if we can get it through the process, which I think is exciting for the state of Iowa.
Absolutely. Thank you again for taking the time to explain that. If you'll indulge me here, I have just a curiosity question. I noticed that in the bill itself, it included some references to mobile units and how that might be a new kind of technique or an existing technique that could be grown under this bill. Could you speak to that practice a little bit and why you think it's an important component?
Yes, definitely. That's something kind of new for Iowa. I know of, I think one for sure, fairly new mobile processing up in Northwest Iowa, and there may be some others that can go to the farm and process. But what we're looking at is maybe potentially a mobile processor that could support more than one, maybe several small lockers. They could go to the farm, do that initial harvesting, get the animal to the locker, and then they can break it down there. They could do this for maybe multiple lockers. Something that I think could quickly build capacity and has worked in other states, but we really don't have a whole lot of it going on in Iowa. And I think this bill could support expansion or new endeavors into that area.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to talk more about it. I guess before I move on to the next question, how do you think that folks on this call, if they're interested, can learn more about it, maybe get involved and help move this forward in the legislative session?
Yep. So like Cody said, it's now House File 857, and as a new legislator, I'm learning the process. That bill number has changed. This is the third time now, so I have to follow along as well. But I think from what it sounds like, we've got great support in the Iowa House. I don't see an issue there. Both sides of the aisle that have been very supportive. When we get it passed, people on this call, I'd encourage you to talk to your senator about it and say, hey, this bill is coming over from the House. We'd like to get it through the process here as soon as we can, and then get excited about having it funded too. So I think that, and then from what I've seen, the process is going to move very quickly here the next 2 or 3 weeks. And so we need your help on that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for introducing that and taking up this important issue. We're excited to help out. The renumbering of bills provides me with a little bit of job security, so I'm not complaining too much there. Shifting gears to our next topic, wanted to talk about some water resources challenges in the state of Iowa, of which you're familiar with given your background. So Iowa is no stranger to challenges associated with impaired water quality, widespread flooding, as we saw in 2019, and again in times since then. As more extreme weather contributes to flooding and associated water management issues, what steps do you think the legislature can and should take to address Iowa's water resource challenges?
So I know a couple of years ago they passed Senate File 512, and we're kind of ramped into the highest level of annual funding, up at $15 million a year on that funding that's coming through, which is great. I'm an advocate that we need to go to the next step and do that 3/8 of a cent for the I Will program and move that along. We don't have the support to do that this session, and I'm not sure we will next session, but we're constantly trying to move that. That would provide some significant long-term sustainable funding to the issue. But there's ways that we can continue as well. I mean, there's a lot of cost share that comes based off that we can leverage state dollars to get the federal dollars in, activity at the local level. one thing I would like to continue to see is find ways that we can put state funding behind these watershed project coordinators, make those positions more stable over time. Now a lot of them are funded through the local soil districts or CDI, conservation districts of Iowa. Those aren't necessarily always the most stable positions because they're based entirely on grant funding. So if we can move to a situation where we could fund those a little more permanently. And I know from my work as a project coordinator in Northeast Iowa, it takes some relationship building over more than 2 or 3 years to get farmers comfortable with what's going on, decide to make some changes and get those changes implemented. So we need to make that a more stable process, I think, going forward. It would be a big thing.
Well, thank you for sharing your perspective on that. We obviously have spoken with you and worked with watershed coordinators across the state to find ways to support them. So we're excited to continue to work on that throughout the rest of the legislative session and into next year. I'm going to shift gears to another topic here, renewable energy. Just kind of ask what your thoughts are here. Statewide, Iowa's solar industry employs about 850 people, and the wind energy industry employs about 10,000 Iowans. Last year, about 59% of Iowa's electricity was produced by renewable wind energy. So looking to the future, what role do you think rural communities like those in House District 64 will play in a clean energy future?
I think rural areas are going to be big at advancing clean energy, not only to supply Iowa, but to supply the nation as well, because we have kind of the wide open spaces. I'm not sure where we are with wind energy and getting kind of maxing out or comfort level with people and how many windmills we have around, but they certainly do a great job at provided, I think, reliable energy for the state of Iowa. What I'm seeing from solar farms that are popping up, individual solar use, I think that's a lot of room to grow across the state. And we need to find ways to continue that process moving forward. I like keeping the focus on private industry to make that happen, but find ways that the government can help increase or ramp up the use of solar.
Well, thank you for your comments there. This last question here is just sort of a softball over to you, just to identify some of the challenges you see. So meat processors were one example that shows how rural economies during this COVID-19 crisis and even before that were struggling economically. Looking forward, what solutions do you believe are available to legislators at the state level and as well as local leaders to help rural economies in the state look forward in a productive way?
Well, I'm really excited about the broadband proposal that's working through. I think we're going to get at least a minimum of $100 million of funding to support that over the next 2 or 3, each of the next 2 or 3 years probably. That's going to be exciting for rural Iowa. I personally think people want to move back to rural Iowa. They found during the pandemic that they can spread out a little easier, maybe move a little freer, do what they want to do in rural Iowa. And if we have the broadband and capabilities for them to work remotely, wherever they want to work. There's a representative that his daughter interviewed for 3 different jobs. One was in Texas, one was in Chicago, and one was in, I think, Seattle, Washington. They were all remote positions. So she was going to be able to, with either of those positions, she was going to be able to continue to live in Iowa, wherever she wanted, and work for those companies. And so we need to have the capabilities to have good broadband all across the state. And I think that's the best way to grow our state right now.
We're also really excited to see those investments moving forward and hope that we can continue to be a partner in those spaces. I wanted to now give the opportunity to remind people, if you have questions, my colleague Kayla just reminded you in the chat there, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat box and we'll get to those as soon as we can. Now I think we're going to transition over to a group of local leaders from your district. We like to do this as common practice between any forum that we have. We like to feature folks that live and work in your district, specifically those that are leading in your district. And so what we did was we reached out based on folks who had registered for the event and identified these three folks that you see on your screen that wanted to maybe have the opportunity to ask some questions today. Janelle Bradley is a Fayette County supervisor in Fayette County, and she's been in the district there for quite some time. Brett Devore is the mayor of Oline, and then Warren Fisk is also on the Oline City Council. You may be familiar with them. I'm not sure. I know that they're at least aware of some of the work that you're doing. So at this point, what I would like to do is give Janelle the opportunity to ask some questions of you, and a couple questions just to get to know one another and get there. So Kayla, if you wouldn't mind spotlighting Janelle here and bringing her up so she can speak with Representative Ingels, I think we can get started on that section.
Hello, I'm Janelle Bradley, as he said. Chad, I want to thank you for all the work that you have been doing on our behalf, not only our district, but the whole state of Iowa. We really appreciate your dedication there in Des Moines. My question today is that while many communities across Fayette County are fortunate to be seeing fiber optic cable run to their municipalities to offer faster speed internet, in most cases, those cities already have various options. An emphasis needs to be made on getting fast internet and or more than one option to those living in the rural areas where there are few or no options. I'm someone who lives in a broadband desert. I have one option, which is a satellite dish, and I pay $75 a month only for internet. I pay another $65 a month, excuse me, to another utility to have basic service landline because cellular service is so unreliable. I recently saw that our rural electric cooperative has been awarded a $4.5 million grant to run fiber to broadband deserts. They are choosing to go to Dorchester. I'm told that the REC can only work in targeted service areas. What does it take to become a targeted service area? And will the governor's new broadband proposal, which I believe that the House has supported, how will it address the need to serve those living in true rural areas? And is there something we as county supervisors can do to help you?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I expected a tough one from a newspaper reporter. So I don't understand the whole process, but I know there's a map out there that shows these targeted broadband deserts. And I can certainly get one. I know telephone company, Buchanan County Telephone, I've been in correspondence with them, and they have that map that they kind of work off of because they've gotten some of those grants as well. So that kind of goes to some of it. I know there's CARES dollars that are going to be targeted, and the new the COVID package from the federal government is going to be targeting some of those areas as well. And there's been a lot of discussion at the legislature. The broadband bill was for 100 by 100, so 100 megabyte upload, 100 megabyte download, which is incredibly fast compared to what we're used to out in rural areas. I'm on DSL, which we're still at, supposed to be 25 download and 3 upload, but it's more like 12 or 13 download and maybe 2 upload. So we're kind of in the same situation there. But there's been a lot of discussion. Do we force all the incentives onto the 100 by 100 to get that money out there, or do we kind of layer it in so that we can get that 25 by 3 at least out to everybody, and then kind of work up over time? I think that's kind of what has been incorporated into some of into the legislation, so that we can reach some of those end of the line. Because from what I hear, it is to do fiber is about $20,000, $20,000 to $30,000 per mile to get out to you. So it's not always the most fiscally responsible, I think, to get 100 by 100 out to every single person out there. But we can do tremendous amount of work if we can get 100 by 100 out to so far, and then maybe do something a little less out to that last few miles where you and I might be. I mean, we're not very far apart. So we're really trying to work on that and trying to get the best that we can as soon as we can out. But then as at the same time, trying to future-proof some of that and get that 100 by 100 as many places as we can, as soon as we can. So it's kind of a roundabout answer to the question, but there's a lot of moving parts in all this, and I'm still trying to catch up on it.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Janelle, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today and to ask a question of the representative. At the center, we constantly work to connect local leaders and folks with their representatives. So next person I wanted to highlight here is Brett Devore. He is the mayor of Owine. And Brett, I think you should be able to start talking. And once you start talking, Kayla will be able to spotlight you like she did Janelle. So
okay, thank you. I do want to echo Janelle's thank you for your hard work. I know what it's like to be a public servant. You cannot make everyone happy 100% of the time. But with that being said, I did talk to several of the people in Owine, letting them know I was going to be on this call. And I had probably a list of 10 questions that people gave me, and I had to kind of narrow them down. The biggest one that concerns me, or one of the biggest ones, is the backfill issue, especially how it's going to hit rural communities. With how do you foresee that happening, and how can cities start preparing for the loss of the backfill?
Well, to be honest with you, the House hasn't discussed it much. The Senate is kind of ahead of us on this tax package. The House and the Senate don't necessarily always see eye to eye on how we're going to handle things. And I've heard a lot already from small communities about the backfill. And so I'm very hesitant to try to change something that would take that away from our communities. And so we'll be pushing back on it. And if you have more information that you could forward to me on that, I would sure appreciate it, because we need to have good information to be able to make the argument here against making changes. So I'm supportive of keeping things the way they are related to that, and trying to find other ways to kind of do what I think the people of Iowa want us to do regarding taxes. So.
Okay. Is it okay if I ask another one?
go for it.
Okay. This one is actually several parts. It has to do with housing, because in Owine we have a severe housing problem, and Warren will attest to that. One of the questions that somebody asked me is, what does the legislature have in its viewpoint to help with the severe lack of homes in Iowa? But beyond that, I would like to see what the legislature's even discussed if they've had any discussion on contract sales. In particular, we have a lot of landlords who have properties that are subpar, would not pass any kind of inspection at all. And what they're doing is passing on these homes to their renters, saying, you have an option. You either move out or you buy this house on contract. I know the city of Des Moines tried to do something with a lot of contract sales where the homes were then required to be inspected by the city, and the state legislature put a stop to that. In my opinion, these are predatory lending practices, because yes, you might have rented that house for $500 a month, but now I can buy it for $450 on a 15-year contract, and the house is only worth $15,000.
Right. To be honest, I haven't done much on this, but it sounds like it may be a little related to some of the childcare stuff that we've done, where we've tried to incent development in improving situations that way. That may be a way we need to go with the housing as well. I'm not sure how that necessarily might look. I know the governor has a housing proposal out, and know all the specifics of that, but I think we really need to, like what you're saying, that sounds like a predatory practice to me, that we really need to find a way to get away from, force the landlords to upgrade their facilities and houses in a way within the law that keeps those safe for those renters, provides the good quality homes for people in small communities, because that's where we really get hit. I mean, we want people to live in Owine or Independence or any of the other small communities, and the housing has to be good. We need to find a way to do that. I need to look into more of that, what that should look like and what's being done, and promise to get back to you on that.
Okay. And I have one other question, and it has to do with kind of how the city's budget, and it's the massive, well, not massive amount, but the amount of the quote unquote back the blue bills that the House and Senate have proposed and looking at passing, in particular, that municipalities that have public safety officers, like Owine, West Union, Fayette, we cannot touch those budgets for fear of, if we reduce them, we have to reduce our entire budget overall, or we lose any kind of state funding. To me, that's our biggest budget expense. So to me, that seems to run contrary to the home rule attitude that the state really tries to adopt. And not only that, but it seems to run contrary to, you have the back the blue, where we can't touch these budgets, but yet the House and Senate just passed and the governor just signed that anybody can get a handgun without a permit now. And I know there were a lot of the statewide agencies were against that proposal. So I'm just kind of curious the dichotomy there. And can you explain, what the thinking behind those back the blue, and then even the you don't need a permit to have a handgun any longer?
Sure. So regarding the back the blue bills and everything in the budgeting, I have on several different things down at the Capitol, I have tried to push back, reinforce the idea that, hey, we need to set kind of universal framework. State law is kind of a universal framework, but those local municipalities, counties need to be able to do what they believe is right at their level as well within the framework of the law. And so impacting budgets, I don't think is a good thing. So as we go forward, I'm not sure how many of those bills will actually go through and see the light of day at the end. So we'll kind of work through that, but I'll certainly take your arguments when we discuss it in caucus on the floor. Say, hey, we need to let the counties and cities budget the way they need to, and respond to their constituents as well. So, and then regarding the gun bill, I voted for it. I don't think, I really believe we're going to have more background checks. It doesn't take away the requirement for background checks, and it actually places more background checks on all guns, where it was a little different. Long guns were a little different than handguns previously. They're all on the same level before. If somebody's going to want to be buying multiple guns, they're going to want to have a permit, or they have to go through that background check every single time. So actually, some of the firearms dealers think that they're going to be having to do more background checks, and it's going to be more of a process for them. We'll have to wait and see what that plays out. I know there's been concern. I've probably heard the most concern regarding private sales. And previously, somebody had to prove that they had a permit before they could sell privately, or some could buy privately from an individual. There wasn't any real teeth behind that. Now there's some teeth behind it. If somebody sells privately a firearm to somebody that shouldn't have it, something happens, and they can trace that gun back to who sold it, that's a felony on that seller. So if I was selling a handgun or a gun to anybody, and I did, even if I knew them, I would work through a firearms dealer, run that background check, and protect myself from any future thing that might happen. So I think we're going to have to work through this, see how it plays out, but it's not going to eliminate the need for background checks on any weapons. It's actually going to increase them. I would maybe say we may have more permits over time. I don't know. If people just want to have the ease of being able to walk into a gun dealer and say, hey, I got my permit right here. I want to buy a gun. I don't want to have to go through the background checks. I know there's both sides to that. And, but so.
Well, thank you, Brett, for taking the time to ask questions of Representative Ingels. And I think having discussion about, a variety of issues is also something we're trying to facilitate here. So thank you both for engaging on that. It's refreshing to see civil dialogue. So thank you both for that. I wanted to now turn it over to Warren Fisk, who is a member of the Owine City Council, and give him the opportunity to ask some questions as well.
I was wondering there whether Brett was going to take all my questions or not. So, and then the other observation about your daughter getting those at-home jobs, would she be able to do that job in a tractor cab if she was hooked up to the internet?
Most definitely, if we've got capable
And I'm just
yeah.
kidding there, Chad. Anything for
a lot
cheap
of things in the tractor cab.
Yeah, yeah, anything for cheap labor. Anyway, Brett did hit on several of the items that I wanted to talk about, but I guess I have some statistics here that kind of points out the problem of I think rural America. Owine, and this is to get into the housing situation, and also taxes, everything else that has to do with city government. And I'm going to use Owine as an example. This is what's happened in this town. Owine was a very old town, which I think is a pretty good example of a lot of other communities in rural Iowa and throughout the United States. But in 1960, this town on the census was 8,200 people. And we've gone from that, and they're saying that the 2020 census, which we haven't seen, but they're saying that we're going to be somewhere around 5,900 people. So we've got a decreasing population. We've got the majority of the housing is old. We're talking built even some before 1900, up to 1940. I think over half our housing is built before 1940s, 1950s. And here's the other statistic that really plagues into this is that we just put the House for Iowa. We put one of those up from the prison system. And we've got a second one that's going to be coming in. We're still in the process trying to sell that first one. And really that thing, anybody with $100,000 income can buy that one. I mean, they've made it pretty easy to buy it. We're putting them in areas where we've torn down other houses or other properties have been torn down in the past that tried to revitalize those sections of the town. And Owine, we're kind of unfortunate is that a majority of our town is the old section of town. To try to put that affordable housing out there for people. And we'd like, and that takes a lot of money from the city to get hold of these properties, go through the litigation. We have the community development, hiring these people to work that, inspect these rentals, that all costs money. And haven't seen a lot of help, I mean, or direction from the state on what this problem, to help take care of this problem. But what are these communities going to look like another 50 years? I mean, we're already into it 100 years. So what's the concrete foundation doesn't last forever. So a lot of these houses just aren't going to make it. And they're not, and to get back to your solar power, higher cost of energy cost, they're not conducive to that because they're not energy friendly. So that's where we need a lot of help or direction from the state to help us with these problems. And we have a hard time getting investors to come in and to build in these areas. That's the reason we do the Homes for Iowa. So I guess, and I didn't see a lot coming out of the state, Chad, which kind of disappoints me. I mean, and I think on the federal level, we're just not catching this, and it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. The landlords, I think he hit that. I totally agree that the other thing is I'd like to see a limit of rentals in a town. And then if we can take care of that contract problem, that would definitely help it too. Because selling them on contract, that's just renting them again. And the deed's still in their name. They if anything goes wrong, they're going to get it back anyway. But the other part of the problem is 2019 census. I got this off the internet. You can get a lot of stuff off the internet. We had a total of 2,593 houses. Of those 2,593, I looked at the household income. We've got 1,504 of those homes are a $50,000 household income, which we know you got single people, widows living on Social Security. Average Social Security check state of Iowa was what, $1,400. So not a lot of income. So these houses aren't going to be kept up,
right?
Because they don't have the money. We work with Upper Explorer Land, and we do get grants in here. I've had some done right across the road from me. Those are great things, but it's going to take a lot more of that. That comes from the federal, but state-wise, we definitely need something coming from the state to start helping us address what are these towns going to look like, and help us trying to figure out how to plan for the future to take care of these problems.
Yep, I know. I guess you didn't really have a question there, but I want to kind of address what you said. Maybe one of the biggest eye-opening things I had during the campaign last fall when I was out knocking doors was just when you drive through towns, you don't really notice individual houses, but when you're walking the street and knocking on 100 doors in a day, you really realize, especially in some neighborhoods, what those houses are like. The people that live there, they don't want their houses to be in a state of disrepair. They don't, like you said, it's based on, we've got low income, and the cost of building products right now that's escalating quickly isn't going to help us out any. So I think definitely we need to find a way to incent development in our small communities. And one thing I've found just in my short time as a legislature, a lot of bills that we do, a majority of the bills that we do come from ideas of everyday Iowans out there that say, just like you, that say, hey, I've got an idea to address this situation. And we start running it up the tree and get some ideas added onto it and come up with a pretty good solution. So anybody that's on this call that has some ideas of how we could address that, because I certainly don't have the ideas, I would be more than willing to take those and run with them. In addition to that, we still aren't sure how we can use CARES dollars or the additional COVID funding from the federal government to address some of these things. They don't necessarily have all the rules out, the specifications that we can use for. That may be something we can tap into, I don't know, or piggyback onto what we might be able to do in the state. I think it may be really difficult to appropriate funds to do this, but if we could look at tax credits to get developers in there and kind of do it from the back door, those are a lot of times much more palatable to legislators from what I'm seeing is a way to do things. So I'm more than willing to sit down with you guys and anybody to address this, because it's something we really haven't talked about a lot. I know Owine has done a lot to address it, especially the dilapidated housing in town. Get those out of the way, try to clean things up. And probably the next step is to address those houses that are still inhabitable, but certainly need a lot of work to upkeep, and how we can. It's going to be a process. We're not going to be able to fix it overnight, but like you say, Warren, we're going to need to say, what do we want it to look like in 50 years?
Mhm.
On a lot of different things, not just housing, on a lot of different things.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Warren, for taking the time, and thank you, Representative Ingels, for engaging on that topic. Clearly, affordable housing is something that is impacting a lot of rural communities in the state, so it's an important issue. I wanted to kind of pivot now to our open question and answer portion. We've gotten several questions throughout the chat. We've got about 15, 16 minutes left, so it's going to be a bit of a marathon session here, Representative Ingels. I hope you can stick with us here. I'll just start with the first one that I saw here from Sharon. She asks, is there any concern over loss of agricultural land to sprawling suburbs in the state legislature?
Oh, I think that's definitely an issue, especially with the many farmers that are part of the legislature. I'm not sure how we slow that down. I have a son and daughter-in-law that live in Ankeny, and that's kind of the epitome of a sprawl into farm ground. I think cost of farmland in those areas may slow things down a little bit. I'm not sure if it will or not. Developers, when they see something like that, they sure have a lot of money to spend, and people seem to want to move to those suburban areas. Maybe COVID pulls them back out and sends them back to the smaller towns. I don't know if we can get broadband going as well, but it's certainly an issue. It has been for a long time, and right now I don't see it slowing down too much. I don't know how we address it though.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering that. I'm going to move to Megan's question here. It says, and I'm just going to read it verbatim here. Childcare is a big issue in our area. Can you speak about things that might be being done to help combat limited access to childcare and also the cost of childcare? She then goes on to give an example and saying the wait list at our local daycare center in Winthrop has a very long waiting list, and she knows that this is discouraging young families from living in rural areas. So I'll just kick that one over to you.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've heard a lot about that, and the Iowa House has actually passed, I think, 10 bills addressed at increasing the availability of childcare, creating incentives for developers to build childcare facilities or renovate current buildings that could be used for childcare, also for employers to build childcare facilities within house for their employees and maybe additional people in the community. And so it kind of runs the gamut as far as what we've tried to do. And I think we've tried to do a lot in the House. A lot of those bills are just kind of sitting in the Senate. So I would encourage anybody on this call to get a hold of your senator and say, hey, why aren't those childcare bills moving? We need that for rural Iowa. It's very important for us. And I don't think it's a big lift for those senators to pass those bills and get them onto the governor. I think they'd be great for Iowa. So we need your help as much as anything.
Kay asked a question here. It said, are you supporting the bill House File 221 tax credit for solar energy?
To be honest, I haven't seen too much on House File 221. I'd have to go back and look, and maybe it's a low enough number. I'm not sure it's still moving through. It may be in the Ways and Means right now. But yes, I would be supportive of additional tax credits for solar.
Great. I'm going to move to Tim's question. Tim Wagner with the Isaac Walton League says, Representative Ingels, nice to see you. As you know, several of us have worked with you and Representative Norland Momsen on a soil health bill. It was numbered HF 801, which passed out of the House Ag Committee with strong bipartisan support. Unfortunately, from what appears to be unnecessary politics in lieu of concerns about the actual bill content, it wasn't allowed to come to the full House for debate. Thank you for your early support of the bill, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how to get this bill passed next year.
Yeah, Representative Momsen and I were really disappointed. We advocated to get that on the House debate calendar. Not really sure what the hangup is on it. I think we'll work on it again. Maybe we may need to take a little different angle on it. Being a new legislator, I'm learning some of the process there, and I know there was some apprehension about stuff that wasn't even in the bill. And I think we need to just have some personal conversations with people on our end, on your end, and engage those. And I hope we can get something done, because I think if we look at a federal infrastructure bill, I could certainly see them tagging something related to soil health onto that. And then we would really want to have some soil health language in our state code to say, hey, we are doing it. I mean, we know we're addressing soil health already, but to get it in the code and say it, kind of formalize it. So I'm right there with you, Tim. I'm frustrated over it too.
I think it's fair for me to say that I was a little disappointed as well. But, good question, Tim. I think we'll move on here. Lee Tesdell has put in the chat here. My meat processor in Nevada, Iowa mentioned that more freezer space and upgrading his equipment are most valuable. In addition, the next generation may need some help financing purchase of the business to keep it in the family. Will House File 857 help with these three needs?
I really believe they will. I would love to see a lot more money than put on it. With CARES dollars in 2020, the state or Iowa Department of Ag was able to get out $4 million to small processors all across the state. I think about 200 processors. Through that process, that application process, they identified need for at least $3 million more, and probably a lot more than that. So our getting 500,000 to $1 million into kind of a steady system, I hope, will help that. But we have a long more way to go. And I think the idea with adding the ability to rent into that bill may be able to help some of those facilities ramp up a whole lot faster than waiting to build something. They may be able to put a cooler in a current building, or pull in cooler space with a refrigerated or freezer trailer and park it and do it that way. So I think all three of those components that you asked about, Lee, we can address in this bill.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move to the next question here from Brad. And I'm unfamiliar with some of these acronyms, so maybe you're familiar with them. But he asks, what is your stance on the proposed removal of slum/blight designation for TIF funding that is currently being discussed in the Senate? Are you familiar with that?
I am not familiar with what's going on in that, and so I would have to look at it. If you've got a particular bill number that I could look at, and certainly would investigate that at this point. So
I'm seeing now that he added later, as well as limiting TIF funding to 20 years. TIF is our small community's best effort to both redevelop our communities as well as attract new businesses to our small towns. I don't know if that clarifies anything for you.
Well, I think maybe the Senate is getting a little more aggressive with TIF discussions than what we have in the House. And I would be hesitant to throw my support behind anything that kind of reduced our ability for TIF. And I know what it's been able, Owine especially, has been able to do, and in other communities as well. So.
Great. Jan asked, does Iowa have a long-term vision that is used to guide legislation or bill development?
I don't see that we do all the time, and especially there's a lot of things that happen in the legislature at the Capitol, and I'm certainly getting my eyes open to as being a new one. And but no, I don't think there's a long-term vision. Maybe for specifics like the broadband bill, we're kind of developing a vision for how it should look, trying to get it funded and what we want it to look like. But as far as the kind of a statewide 10 or 20 or 50-year plan, I'm not seeing that. And so much a lot of legislation comes from what may be happening in one town or one city, and a legislator is able to kind of build that and grow that through the process, just like I did with the butchery bill that we've talked a little bit about. That just came from an idea that I filed, and it's kind of built from there. So many other ones come from individuals, bring it up through the system. So we should maybe have a kind of a long-term vision, but I don't see one.
Again, I'm going to say it's a little bit of job security for me here. And so thank you for that, Representative Ingels. Looks like we have one more question. And so I would encourage folks, as I read this one and the representative answers this, maybe think of if you have any final questions for him in the remaining 7 minutes that we have. So Mallory asked again about 857. She asked, do meat processors want to expand, or do we need more processors in general? Particularly interested in poultry processing and the very few in our state.
Yeah, no, I think there's a combination of some want to expand, some want to improve the facilities they have, maybe not necessarily expand, but get more efficient so that they can maybe serve their clientele in a little different way. But there's a lot out there that don't want to expand. So we certainly need to find ways to support new facilities. There's already a process through the Iowa Economic Development Associate, or whatever the acronym is there, authority, excuse me, to apply for grants or primarily tax credits at this point. And so that's more of a longer term thing. And what we're trying to do with this program is get grants out in the front end so people can do something right away rather than go to the bank, borrow, and it takes time. And you have to make money and actually be in a position to pay taxes to get a tax credit. And so that's going to take a process, and a new facility isn't necessarily cash flow all the time right from the start. And so there's a process there. So, but through the development of this bill and what I've learned, there's already some things in place that maybe we need to do a better job of promoting to our local lockers, entrepreneurs that want to do new things across the state. And related to your poultry question, I think that's the next step we need to look at. There's a lot of maybe we need to work on some of the food safety licensing, inspection type of thing that would allow us to maybe do some mobile processing there, get those inspected, and be able to sell that way, or develop a mobile processing where they can move around the state rather than us as farmer loading up the trailer and taking 100 chickens to one of the 2 places that we have now and try to schedule that. So there's some things we can do. And if people have ideas of how we can make that a better process, I would certainly be interested in kind of working that through the system.
Well, thank you again for answering that. We have one more, and I think we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. So I think this will be our last question, and then we'll do some closing comments here. But Anna asked, you mentioned that you support funding the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, also known as IWIL, with a 3/8 cent sales tax increase. What do you think the biggest challenges are for getting this accomplished?
Well, I think the big thing, there's just resistance to anytime the word tax increases is used. There's going to be a lot of pushback. We need to find a way, and it's not going to go up just by 3/8 of a cent. It's going to be, if we increase it, it's probably going to be a full penny. And so we need to work through, what is that other 5 cents? Can we take that off of people's taxes somewhere else, whether it's property tax, income tax? So there's going to be a big discussion about tax reform through that process. I think it's a good conversation to have, but it's I think we were last year before the pandemic, the governor proposed some legislation to kind of do that, address mental health funding, address the water quality funding, and some other things. We may not have been too far away at that point, but the COVID sure shook things up. And so right now, I think we may be a little further away than we were at that point. Need to kind of build some momentum back into it at some point.
Well, thank you again for you to answering the questions and engaging with us today. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. And thanks again to our panel of local leaders. We really appreciate the time that everyone took to spend with us today and to engage with Representative Ingels about really important issues that impact rural Iowa. We talked about meat processing and water quality and renewable energy and affordable housing. Clearly, we have a lot of things to work on. And I think I can speak for everyone here at the center and say that we're excited to continue to work with everyone on this call, and especially you, Representative Ingels, to help move these policies and initiatives forward. I wanted to say thank you again from on the perspective of the Center for Rural Affairs. We appreciate the opportunity to engage with rural Iowans every day. There are questions about these policy topics that we can help you dive in further on. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to speak at any point. At this point, I wanted to give these last couple of minutes here, turn it back over to you, Representative Ingels, to deliver any closing comments or remarks that you may have before we close out today.
Well, I sure appreciate the opportunity of visiting with you, Cody, and everybody that was on the call here today. I'm learning something new every day here at the Capitol. And the more I hear from you all, the better questions I can ask of not only my fellow legislators, but of department people all across government. I had some questions earlier this week that got me on a call with the Department of Transportation to learn a little bit more about ag aviation law and fees that are applied to ag aviators that come out and apply chemicals for farmers. And so the more I can hear from you all on specific things, it helps me be a better legislator and be more responsive to you. And so I would encourage you, if you ever have a question or anything, give me a call, shoot me an email, get on my newsletter list. I try to put something out every week during the session, kind of going through what I'm seeing. I plan to do that once we get out of session, back that off a little bit every couple weeks or month, try to be regular about it. But feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email anytime, and I'll try to get back to you. Or I will get back to you. So.
Well, thank you again to you, Representative Ingels, and everyone for joining us today. We mentioned at the beginning that we did stream this live on Facebook. So if you'd like to view it there, you can share that, interact with it there. It's also going to be posted on our Center for Rural Affairs webpage, which is just cfra.org. And again, if you'd ever like to engage with the Center for Rural Affairs, you can reach out to me or find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on our website. So thank you all for the time today. It looks like we are right on time. That does not happen often during the legislative session. So